Hello. I'm super excited to talk to all of you about low fidelity design. The lens I'd like to take today is actually focused on inclusivity and how we can make sure that by using low fidelity, we're pulling in non-designers into our design process. So before we dig into low fidelity, I want to talk about a few scenarios that might sound kind of familiar to some of you. So one of these I deem the opinionated stakeholder. So if you're like me, you're in a lot of project kickoff meetings. And one of the things that I often see in a kickoff meeting is that you'll have some stakeholders present, and inevitably at some point in the presentation, they'll raise their hand and say, hey, I have this idea for a solution. I think we should build a very specific thing, and we should build it as quickly as possible. And then we should deliver this value to customers and profit. Are we done? And as a designer, obviously, I have strong feelings about this. I believe very strongly in starting with a problem and then working forwards to solutions. But at the same time, I think the stakeholder often wants the same thing that we as designers want. They want to deliver something that solves the user's problem, and they're just not always sure how to engage with our design process. But there's other scenarios much like this. This one I call the overly polite user. So often you'll get into your design process and you'll come up with a prototype. And you'll show this prototype to some users. You'll do a usability test. And you'll give them some scenarios and watch them try and use your prototype to solve their problem. And sometimes they'll have a lot of issues using your prototype. And it's kind of painful to sit there and watch them and see things kind of going off the rails. And so you'll get to the end and you probably have a pit in your stomach and you're asking them, okay, well, how did it go? How do you feel like this would solve your problem? And to your utter shock and dismay, they tell you, well, there were a few things I stumbled on, but overall the product seems great. I'm giving it 10 out of 10, ship it. And so once again, as a designer, this is hard to hear because part of a great design process is this idea that you want to pair up with your users and get that unfiltered feedback that you need so importantly to make the best possible product that you can. But there's more scenarios like this. Let's say that you're at the very end of your design process and you're now ready to actually build the thing. So you meet up with your lead developer and you show them this wonderful set of mocks that describe your vision to the last pixel. And they look at it, they nod sagely a few times, and then they say, yep, we're going to go off and try and build this. And they disappear. And 3 days later, you're waking up one morning and you think, wow, it's been a while since I heard from those developers. I should probably check in and see how things are going. And so you reach out on Slack and say, how's it going with the design implementation? And they get back to you and they say, well, it's going okay. It's taken us 20 hours of effort so far, and we're kind of converging on your vision, but it's not quite right yet. But you're the expert, and we know that your vision is the right thing to solve the user's problem, so we're going to keep going. And this raises all sorts of alarm bells for me because, again, as a designer, part of the design process, it doesn't end at the point at which you hand off mocks. It continues into implementation, and you want to be sensitive to the effort required to build things. And so one of the things that, as a designer, I want to figure out how I can pull the developer into my process and explore feasibility before they get down the wrong road too far. So obviously there's this wall, and this wall is what prevents our design process from being as inclusive as it could be. What we want is for this wall to be gone and for people to be able to engage with us as designers so that we get as many different people in the room as possible with as many different perspectives as possible to deliver the best possible product that we can. So what do we do about this? So I was asking myself this very question at work. I'm at New Relic. And one of the things that I was realizing is like maybe there's small changes I can introduce into the process to kind of nudge people towards being involved in the design process. Because I was realizing that it wasn't enough to have these other people in the room with you if they're still too hesitant to engage. So we were in a kickoff meeting, and I decided I was going to do things a little bit differently. So the stakeholder gets their hand raised up and they say, I have this idea for a solution. And instead of reacting to that, I said, okay, let's write down your idea. Let's express it visually. And we ended up creating this cool taxonomy slash workflow diagram that kind of helped us have a single visual artifact we could use to talk about the thing that we were trying to deliver. And we had a great conversation. And so afterwards, I was thinking, it might be cool to conceptualize what a solution might look like. And so I started sketching out some concepts. And then the researcher I was working with reached out and said, I think these concepts are great, but I think it'd be also great to have some variants so that when we show these to users, they have multiple different things to look at and react to. So then I went ahead and created multiple variants on each of those concepts. So we showed these to users, and it was amazing. We got feedback that as they were looking at it, we saw that they were struggling with various concepts in the comments. And then when we asked them about it, the feedback they gave us didn't have that same level of cognitive dissonance that I'd noticed before. And so once again, things were going a little bit better this time. And so after we got all the feedback, the next thing we did was talk to developers, and we showed them these sketchy concepts. And what that did is it sparked a conversation. And instead of them going off and trying to build the thing, we had a conversation about feasibility and different possible paths they could take and how hard those different paths might be. So this whole process was going surprisingly well. And afterwards, I did a bit of a retrospective to think about what was going so well and what the common factor was. And I think this low fidelity idea actually is one of the keys to inclusivity in your design process. And I think one of the reasons why low fidelity is so great is that it kind of gets people into a mode where they're designing without realizing that they're designing. When you show something that's very high fidelity and it's pixel perfect, it's kind of intimidating. It kind of looks like something that you're well on your way to building. And if they were to give you feedback, it probably wouldn't be well incorporated, or you're not going to have time to adjust. Whereas when you show something low fidelity, all of a sudden they see that you're early in your process, and when they if they give you feedback, there's time to get it incorporated as you move to high fidelity. So let's go back to those original scenarios that I was talking about, and let's see how low fidelity might change the narrative a little bit. So for a stakeholder, every stakeholder I've ever known has a lot of interesting ideas in their brain. And the chief challenge that a lot of them have is getting those ideas expressed in a way that gets them and their team on the same page. And as designers, visualizing ideas is kind of our superpower. And the way that we do this doesn't matter so much as the fact that we do this. So you can use user stories, you can use storyboards, wireframes, workflows. These are all ways of getting ideas expressed. And so we can take that stakeholder's idea and we can express it, and then we can ask them, we can probe and say, what's the problem that you're trying to solve with the solution that we've now expressed visually and that you agree is reflective of what you're thinking? And so if we can extract a problem statement from the stakeholder, then we can run the problem statement through our design process and come up with more ideas that can sit alongside that stakeholder's idea. And this is all stuff that low fidelity really, really shines at. What about users? So there's an analogy I like to use, which is that if I'm thinking about climbing a mountain, there's a lot of details that don't really matter. As someone climbing a mountain, the thing I primarily care about is whether it's safe to climb a particular mountain. So knowing that the mountain is erupting is really important information. And the thing is, you don't need high fidelity to express that important concept. In fact, low fidelity is often better because you can strip out the things that you don't want to distract people by and don't want their feedback on. And so low fidelity is a way of helping users stay very much focused on the concepts, not the details. And as I mentioned earlier, the other great thing about low fidelity is that it signals to people where you are in your design process. If they see something low fidelity, it looks very mutable. It looks like you can reach out and make changes easily. And so you're not only telling people that the design is open for change, but you're actually showing them through the medium that you're using that it's open for change. What about developers? I think with developers, it's very similar. Low fidelity is wonderful for exploring multiple paths, and you can take those multiple paths and talk to a developer and explore the feasibility of each path. So you might go to a user, show them concepts, and get their feedback on the concepts, and then realize, oh, there's these three ideas that each are fairly well positioned to solve the user's problem. But without knowing how difficult they are to build, it's really hard to know which one to settle on. And so having a conversation with a developer lets you explore that. And because it's low fidelity, they can't just go off and build it, right? And so you can have a conversation in low fidelity with a developer that helps you as a designer figure out where to go as you move things to high fidelity in your design process. So let's do something a little bit different and let's try this live. And we're just going to take 10 minutes and we're going to go through a fictional project where we go through an entire project and see what it's like to use low fidelity to make your design process a little bit more inclusive than maybe it was before. So if you're following along at home or you want to try this afterwards, you're going to need some materials. I'm a big fan of pen and paper, but also a stylus and a tablet is excellent as well. I've actually used both of these for this particular presentation. But the idea is that you need a medium that helps you express your ideas in low fidelity and do so in a way that's highly collaborative. So let's imagine a fictional project. Let's say that we're in a kickoff meeting involving a new feature that has a table in it, and this table lists different people. And so we're in this kickoff meeting talking about this project, and the stakeholder raises their hand and they say, I think we should make this table sortable. Okay, so the first thing we should do is we should express their idea and make sure that we're articulating like what they're talking about accurately. But then we should push back and ask, okay, so what problem are you trying to solve with this? And the stakeholder might hem and haw for a second and then say, oh, well, I imagine if someone comes into this feature, they're going to be looking for a particular person. And if the table is not sorted, it's going to be really difficult for them to find the person they're looking for. And so that's why I think we should make this table sortable. So this is great, right? Because we have a solution that the stakeholder has given us, and now we have a problem that we can run through our design process and come up with more ideas. So what we're going to do now is switch over to a video where we show this process of storyboarding different ideas. So here I've got my favorite pen and pencil, or pen and paper, and we're going to storyboard the stakeholder's idea. So the stakeholder has told us that they think this table should be sortable. So let's create this storyboard. So we're going to start with just a simple table that has a couple of columns. We'll give it maybe a first name column and a last name column. And we're going to go ahead and click on, put a little virtual cursor next to this first column, just to indicate this is where we're going to go to initiate the sorting action. And then just to complete this example, we'll add a few names to our table just so that we have some data to work with. Great. So this is just a simple example to see if we're articulating the stakeholder's vision accurately. And so in this second cell, we're going to show what happens after I've clicked this column. So now we're going to have this table be sorted by first name. So we'll add a little caret there. It's the first name. And then we're going to put our data in the table as we did before, but this time we're going to sort it. And so what this lets us do is it lets us show the stakeholder that we understand their idea before we back up and start rolling forward from the problem statement again. So now let's have some fun with this. Let's think about another way we could solve this problem of finding a particular user in this table. And let's do something that involves filtering. So in our filtering solution, we're going to put a filter box right on top of our table. And so we'll create a filter box, and then we'll put a virtual cursor in the filter box so we can see that this is where we're clicking to initiate this filter action. And then below our filter, we'll go ahead and put in the table as we did before with all of our names. And then once we've put this together, in the next cell, we're going to show what happens if we search for something. So we're going to go ahead and search for Adam. And because people might have a typo, or maybe they want to they aren't entirely sure what they're looking for, we'll make this kind of flexible by using fuzzy matching. So if they search for Adam, maybe we could return some names that have Adam in them, but maybe with two Ds instead of just one. So let's just illustrate this one really quick. So this is great because this gives us a second solution that could sit alongside that stakeholder's original idea, and it can be on the same playing field. But now let's add a third idea and let's do something a little bit different. Let's create something that is called a sacrificial concept. And the idea behind a sacrificial concept is that you're exploring ideas that are almost certainly not good. So why do this? So the reason you do this is because when you're showing concepts to users, you want unfiltered feedback. And it's much easier to give unfiltered feedback on something that looks imperfect. And so for this idea, we're going to create a grouping concept. So in our table, we're going to have all the names grouped by first letter. And so if I want to see all names beginning with A, I have to click this A group to expand the A group. So this is objectively a bad idea, but what it does is it's going to get people into a mode where they're giving us the kind of feedback that we need to make the other concepts as good as they can be. So once we finish illustrating this last cell, we'll have 3 concepts that we can now validate with our users, while also incorporating that original stakeholder idea that precipitated this whole exercise. Perfect. So now we have these 3 concepts, and we have to figure out which concepts are going to be good and which ones are going to be bad. So we could pull the view back to the slides. Perfect. So we're going to show these to users. So we have these 3 concepts, A, B, and C. And so we're going to show this to users, and they might look at the first one and be like, sorting makes sense for me because often when I come here, I don't know exactly who I'm looking for, and I just want to be able to scan until I find who I'm looking for. And then they might look at the middle concept and say, this also makes sense to me because sometimes I know exactly who I'm looking for, and I just want to see that person in the list. So I want to be able to type them in or copy and paste the name from a spreadsheet. But then they might look at the third concept and say, I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to do here. This isn't a pattern I've seen in other products I use. I'm really confused. I think this one's amiss. And you're getting that raw unfiltered feedback that you're looking for. So this is great. So we've explored 3 concepts. We've validated them with users. We've learned that our sacrificial concept is not good, which we knew already. And we've gotten some authentic feedback on the other 2 concepts that we're exploring. So now we need to talk to our developers and explore feasibility. And so as designers, there's kind of 2 schools of thought related to what you release and how much stuff you bundle together when you release it. One school of thought is the MVP camp. And this is the idea that you need to ship value in tiny increments. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't want to leave value on the shelf getting stale over time. You just want to have a continual stream of stuff being shipped out. The problem with this is that those tiny increments often aren't very delightful. They often don't solve the user's problem comprehensively, and they can be a bit of a letdown. On the other end of the spectrum, you have this idea that you want to be as delightful as possible. You want to solve things as comprehensively as possible. And you want to surprise people by solving their problem more thoroughly than they could have imagined themselves. And this obviously entails shipping things in larger bundles than you might otherwise. Now, we probably don't want to be on either extreme, but we don't know necessarily where we need to sit on this spectrum. And so if we talk to our developers about these concepts that we've been validating, they might look at the sorting concept and say, this isn't that difficult to implement because our table already supports the ability to sort. So far, so good. Then we might show them the filtering concept, and they might say, this also is not that difficult to implement because our table supports the ability to filter, and then adding an input field on top of the filter, on top of the table that lets us input the filter query is also not difficult. So this is useful information for us as designers because it means that we could go either route and either one's going to be efficient to build. But what this doesn't tell us is where we fall on the spectrum of should I ship a very minimal MVP or should I ship all the stuff at once to make this a delightful experience. So the other thing that we might hear from our developers is that it's not only easy to do each of these individually, but it's also easy to do them together. In fact, because they're already into the same code, it's probably more efficient to make both of these changes at once rather than making these changes individually. And so just like that, by having this conversation with our developers, while we're still at this conceptual phase, they're able to help us inform us as to how comprehensive and delightful we can get away with in this release without running the risk of having a bunch of value sitting on the shelf for months on end. So really, you have to talk to developers early if you're going to understand from the feasibility perspective how much delight you can ship at once. So now it's your turn. We've talked a lot about a lot of really interesting ideas. We've talked about how to use low fidelity to pull out ideas from your stakeholder and get them expressed so that the stakeholder is able to build a common understanding with the team about what their vision is, while also then being able to back up and have a problem statement and then run forward and generate more solutions that can sit alongside the stakeholder's original idea. And low fidelity is great for this. The other thing we've talked about is the importance of really trying to extract as much unfiltered feedback from users as possible. And how low fidelity, again, is really great here, because when you show someone high fidelity mock, it looks as though you're very far along in your design process. And if they were to give you feedback, it would be very difficult for you to apply that feedback into the design before you go to implementation. And even if that perception is not true, the fact that there can be a perception means that it's good to strive to make the medium look very mutable and able to change and reflect the feedback that you're given. So this is where low fidelity and concept testing can work together to create that environment that's very, very much conducive to unfiltered feedback. And then the final thing we talked about is this importance of talking to developers and exploring this question of feasibility. I think it's very easy to be comfortable with a developer who really wants to make things look great and they want to respect your vision as a designer. But when you find these people, it's often that they can take it too far and go all the way to trying to build something that is just not as efficient as it could be while also solving the problem efficiently. So having these conversations with a developer in low fidelity can help you explore the feasibility of different ideas before you take them to the next level. So I'd like to turn this back to you and encourage you to explore how low fidelity could be used to make your design process a little bit more inclusive. So thank you so much for your time. I loved speaking to all of you about low fidelity today, and I just hope that all of you can take what you're learning and use it to make your corner of the design universe just a little bit more awesome. Thank you.